bulking, gaintaining, mass building. Oh man, there are days where I hate social media. I've been coaching for 25 years now, and I've been training even longer than that, which is mind-blowing sometimes. And I hear these different arguments from people, and it's like, well, you're not wrong, but like you're not really getting it. And so I'm going to touch on this again, even though I did a thing on bulking the other day about how, bulking isn't dead. Um, let's just listen to some of the people's arguments for why you don't need to bulk, and they're like, well, you can gain and you can gain muscle in a calorie deficit and all this stuff like that. And those things are absolutely true. You will not hear me say that that's not true. You can certainly gain muscle in a calorie deficit. You can main gain, or whatever you want to call it, or gaintain. You can, maintain the same body fat, and you can gain muscle. Yeah, and you can even maintain the same weight and gain muscle. This is a thing that I've done multiple times when I moved up and down. When I would move up, I would eat my way up to whatever the weight was, so like 155 pounds, and I was a soft 155, but then I would just try to stay at 155 and lean out at 155, which means that I was still 155, but as time went on, I became a leaner 155, right? So can you do these things is a separate discussion from whether or not you should, or whether or not these are the best ways to do things, if that makes sense, right? So can you do this? Yes, you can. You can build muscle doing sets of 50. Is that the best way to do it? Let's say you're going to do 52 sets per week, right? Like that study. Is that really the best way for you to train, though? Like, is that efficient? So, can you gain muscle with a very small surplus or even in a deficit? Yeah. Is that the best way for you to gain muscle? No, not at all. If you wanted to gain muscle fast and you wanted to gain muscle, as efficiently as possible, you would have a larger surplus. Now, this is a number from Dr. Donald Layman. If you don't know who that is, then you need to go look him up. This is not Chad's number. And he was explaining in one of his interviews, and this is assuming that you're not using drugs, that you can basically build about 5 grams of contractile tissue per day. Okay? That's very small. 5 grams, you won't even notice that. Now, mind you, once you add in the water and glycogen that comes with a gram of contractile tissue, maybe you're gaining 25 grams a day of lean body mass, because lean body mass includes the glycogen and the water that comes into the tissue, right? So if you have a pound of muscle, that pound of muscle isn't just contractile tissue. It has, water and glycogen and things like that in it. It's like the difference between a steak and beef jerky. If you take a steak and you dry it out into beef jerky, it looks much smaller, and it weighs less. So 5 grams of contractile tissue means like the beef jerky. The 25 grams is more like the steak, right? So that's what you can gain in a day. And if you think about this, that's the maximum you can gain. And so, across the 365-day year, okay, what are we really getting out of this? Maybe 3.5 pounds of muscle total. Okay, contractile tissue, folks. Don't twist that into something that I didn't say. Contractile tissue, okay? So, once you add in the water and the glycogen and all this stuff like that, I mean, that could look like 15 to 20 pounds on someone, depending on, how well hydrated they are and whether or not they carb loaded and all that stuff like that. In terms of actual contractile tissue, we're talking small amounts that you can gain, okay? Now, if we were to think about this in terms of what is efficient, right? It takes a very long time to build muscle. As we just discussed, in a whole year, you could build like 3.5 pounds of contractile tissue. It does not take as long to lose fat, though. You could lose 3.5 pounds of fat in way less than a year. So if I was to think about what's the most efficient way to do this, and this is just a math equation, this isn't like an opinion or something like that. I mean, it's just literally sitting down and thinking about the math, okay? If you were to main gain or gaintain or whatever they call it, you're probably not going to maximize that 5 grams per day. You're probably going to get less than that. That's the maximum you could get. And that's based off of like overfeeding studies where people were also doing resistance training and all this stuff like that, okay? Overfeeding in itself will cause an increase in muscle mass, by the way. So there's another defense for bulking. But anyways, if you were to think about this logically and just math it out, okay? Let's say that you did bulking and you really did maximize that 5 gram protein synthesis, okay? And you really maxed it out. Like you made sure you got your 5 grams of net positive every single day for a whole year. You have gained, maybe 3.5 pounds of contractile tissue. And, that would probably look something between 15 and 20 pounds of muscle once we add in the water and the glycogen, okay? Now, let's just say that because you were in such a caloric surplus, right? You were bulking, so you also gained 15 pounds of fat. All right, so for every pound of muscle that you gained a pound of fat. All right. Oh, this is terrible. You've gained 30 pounds, 15 of it is muscle, 15 of it is fat. Yeah. Okay, it took a whole year to build 15 pounds of muscle. But you know full well that there are people who manage to lose a pound of fat per week. Now, I would recommend you slow that down and do a half pound of fat per week to make sure that you don't lose muscle, because a caloric deficit will cause you to lose muscle. So if you were to slow this down and say, I want to lose 15 pounds of fat, all right? Okay. And we're going to lose a half pound of fat per week. That's just 30 weeks. That's way less than the year that you wasted, right? Wasted in a year if you weren't in a surplus and maxing it out. So, 52-week year, 30 weeks, right? But in reality, those of you out there already know that you can lose more than that. So I just purposely slowed it down even more. But plenty of us have done things where we lost a pound of fat per week. So you could lose that 15 pounds of fat in 15 weeks if you wanted to. I don't like doing that because that usually means that people have a larger deficit than is comfortable. But that doesn't mean you can't do it. And if we were arguing about not what's pleasurable or comfortable, and we were arguing about what's optimal, it would be more optimal for you to go ahead and gain that 15 pounds of muscle and 15 pounds of fat across a year, and then just diet off the 15 pounds of fat in 15 weeks. That would be more efficient. You would net more muscle gain in less time than if you were to main gain or gaintain or whatever they're calling it. And certainly you're gaining more muscle than you would gain in a caloric deficit. So, although people are not incorrect, yes, you can gain muscle in a caloric deficit, and you can main gain or gaintain or whatever the fucking term is that people are using, okay? But in terms of time and efficiency, it would be much more time efficient for you to just go ahead and gain some fat along with that muscle and then just diet it off. Because it's not that hard to diet it off, and it doesn't take nearly as much time. It takes way more time to build muscle than it does to lose fat. And everyone knows that. Think about it. I've discussed this in the past. I went into the hospital at 157 pounds. I came out of the hospital at 236 pounds. That's a lot. That's a lot to gain. I was miserable. It was too much weight on my body. It actually physically hurt, okay? And then I lost 80 pounds. I lost that 80 pounds, okay? I promise you I can't gain 80 pounds of muscle in any length of time. So I lost 80 pounds of fat. There's no way I will ever gain 80 pounds of muscle. Even think about it. Imagine if I could gain 80 pounds of muscle. How long would that take? Even if we maxed it out and I said I gained 20 pounds of muscle in a year, which is insane. That's faster than Nick Walker. Nick Walker gained 10 pounds of muscle per year. Big Ramy gained 10 pounds of muscle per year. Okay? It would take me 8 years at that rate. Pretend that I'm somehow superhuman and I have 20 pounds of muscle in a year. It would still take 4 years. It did not take 4 years for me to lose 80 pounds of fat. You can lose fat way faster than you can gain muscle. So that's why, in terms of just efficiency, it just makes sense for you to just go ahead and bulk, gain as much muscle as you can, and then diet it off. And the other thing I want to touch on here, this could be its own video. Dude, your 4-week or 6-week or 8-week hypertrophy block is like a waste of time and energy. I just told you how slow muscle building is. If you want to build significant amounts of muscle, you're going to have to commit to it. Like, you look at a guy like that Alex Leonidas guy, like, he committed to bulking for like multiple years in a row before he ever did a cut. Some of these natural bodybuilders only compete every 2 years because they're committed to bulking for 2 years straight and then they diet the fat off. Just stop and think about that for a bit, okay? It's really slow to build muscle. It's much faster to lose fat. Therefore, just in terms of efficiency and time, it just makes sense to bulk if your goal is to get as much muscle as possible. Now, for those of you who are athletes and body composition matters, sure, yeah, I fully think that, that's not a good strategy for you. I'm not going to do it. I have weight classes that I have to make. But if your goal was just, I got to get to be the biggest dude I possibly can, bulking makes sense.